today's tech tip, I'm going to be talking about just general network organization. In other words, how you track things in your organization and how organized it should be for your small business. So for instance, if you're going to your closet where your server resides and you've got network cables everywhere, they may be a mess. Why that's important to not be that way, why it should be structured and organized, and how it's going to help your business. So I'm going to do this just all through pictures. So some of these pictures are for some clients that we've cleaned up in the past. Some of them are just things I found on the internet that I thought were great examples of why we do things or why we don't do things. And I'm just going to kind of go through these. So the first one you see up on my screen, that is a nightmare. That's a nightmare scenario. That's someone's network closet somewhere. I think there's even a marker board in the back. I don't know where this is. But that's really difficult to track and manage, very dangerous on top of everything else. You know, if OSHA showed up, they'd probably shut the place down. But that's just a whole bunch of racks with a bunch of cables hanging off of them, a bunch of Ethernet cables, and that is just not sustainable, not supportable. So just a bunch of no right there. So all right. So here's another good example. We see this a lot where someone put in a network closet. Maybe they're not an IT person, but they know enough to be dangerous, and they build a little shelf themselves or have one put in, and then they just connect everything up, and it all works, and it probably works fine. But the problem you run into, and you're going to hear me say this a lot in this little tech tip, is nobody can support that quickly. There's nothing traceable in there. There's no punch down block for labeling. So those cables dropping out of the ceiling that are Ethernet may go to some offices within this facility, but there's no labeling where I can trace it back to that office if they have a problem or need to be connected differently or something else. So although it doesn't look horrible, and it's a very common appearance to look like this in a lot of small businesses, this should be put on a wall-mounted rack. It should be organized, structured. It should also have be grounded properly and so on. So this would be a big no-go for a organization. Too much here going on, too hard to trace, too hard to track down if you had a problem or to add anything. I'm sure someone in the organization or whoever supports this knows where everything's at, but that's historical knowledge they have. It's not something that someone else can come in and pick up easily. So definitely not something you want to do. All right, here's another one, kind of similar scenario, because again, we see these everywhere like this. The first thing you'll notice, there's a big hole in the wall. Cables are coming straight out. And most of those cables appear to be going straight into the back of the punch down, which is fine. That's the way it should be. They have labeled those cables using painter's tape, which is not good. It's not a good solution long term. It's okay, you know, if you're running new cables, you use something like that temporarily till you get your cable labeler out or you get everything done. The other thing you'll notice is there's little white rectangular squares above the top of the punch down right in here. Those should have numbers on them, or letters and numbers, or a combination of the two that tell you exactly which wall panel these cables are going to. So that if you're troubleshooting something in someone's office, you can quickly come in here, identify which cables go into the punch down and where the punch down is going to the switch and so on. So troubleshooting this would be very difficult, if not impossible, without a toner and figuring out where everything's at for someone who doesn't have the historical knowledge. Again, you've got stuff stacked on the shelf over here. I don't know what any of this equipment is, but it looks like maybe there's a firewall mixed in there somewhere. That might be a DVR, a digital video recorder there, and maybe that's a digital video, a monitor showing security cameras or something else on the network. Again, just not organized, not structured well, very hard to troubleshoot, hard to support. And sure, if you've got someone that knows this, it's probably not going to be a problem, but as soon as that person gets hit by a bus, some act of God happens, it's going to be really hard to find someone that can come in and just jump right in and sort this out in a timely manner. Now, this is small scale. The one I showed you before is large scale, which is even much harder to troubleshoot. All right, so this is, again, the stuff of nightmares. So this is someone's server racks, and they've got all kinds of Ethernet cables and things laying on the ground there. It looks like they've tried to put in some kind of rubber barrier between the ground and the cables, but it looks like there's some very large power cables, and there's Ethernet cables there, all kind of in one big wad. If I need to go from one point to the other and plug something in or take it out, it's going to be really difficult to do without stepping or tripping on something and shutting down the whole network. And the last thing in the world you want to do is yank a cable out of one of these servers, racks, or switches or whatever, damage the server, damage the switch, but then have to figure out where it came out of. Your whole network could be down and you're troubleshooting it and trying to figure out how to get it back together. It's just a nightmare. It's just not good at all. So here's another one we see a lot where the network closet is used for a lot of other things, not just the network. So these people have a server sitting on a shelf above some clothes. Usually that's a sign that the stuff is not really secured. Someone has access that's probably not an IT person to get to those clothes or whatever they need to do. There's a little battery backup system down there with the clothes. You can see there's dust everywhere. Clothes generate lint and dust and everything else. So not a good scenario here. It's probably in a closet that doesn't have good cooling. They've got some kind of fan system built into what looks like a door here. I'm not sure what that is right off, but you can really see all the dust caked into these systems. This is a fire hazard. It's really not a good thing to have it set up this way. All right. Okay, so this is the stuff of nightmares. This is someone's server closet that is filled up with water. All this brown is not floor, that is water. And you can see where the water is actually, all this equipment is on, and it is literally cycling that water through a cooling fan on what appears to be a battery backup system here. So this is the reason we don't put electronic equipment near the floor. If you have a drain backup or a sink or plug, whatever, it can back up and fill for a few inches, and a few inches is all it takes to burn out a bunch of equipment. You'll see on some of the other pictures, there's surge protectors on the floor. Any of that stuff gets wet, it's not going to just fry the surge protector. It's going to cause it to arc across, and all the surge protection in the world is not going to be able to stop current from flowing through a water gap between it. So it's going to fry your equipment. So we like to keep all of our equipment up off the floor, either mounted to a wall up high, or we like to put in shelves and move this equipment down here at the bottom, higher up in the rack. And as you can see over here to the left, it looks like there's a bunch of cables also plugged into something here, and those are going down into the water. So I have no idea how deep this water is, but you want to be really cautious about stuff like that. So this is one that, again, we see this all the time. The server room, people don't know where to put it, so they put it in the water closet. There's a drain in the floor, and if any of you guys have ever seen it, these drains back up. They back up all the time, and when they do, they can fill a room full of muck and junk and humidity. And humidity and moisture is the killer of servers and networking equipment. So as soon as you see a room like this, you can see the rusty water nastiness under the server rack, you know these people are in for trouble. My favorite thing about this is that's a drain coming off of a dedicated little window air conditioning system. So this thing pulls humidity out of the air as part of its process for cooling down the server room. Then it's dumping it right into a drain directly below the servers, which is then, of course, feeding humidity back up into the servers, which is a no-go. This is what I was talking about before with the surge protectors. You can see there's a surge protector here. Here's a power brick going to something. There's more surge protectors buried in here. If water, anything got in here on the floor, sprinklers went off, whatever it might be, this equipment's all toast. It's just gone. So you hope you got good backups. In general, when I see closets this bad, usually the backups don't exist or they're just as bad. So form follows function. When things are a mess like this, it's not normal. A lot of people think, oh, it's IT gear, it's going to look like that. No, it should not look like that. Nobody should build your network, and none of your networks should look like this. They should be structured, organized, cabled, and labeled. If they're not, they're setting you up for a lot of billable time to troubleshoot issues later on whenever the person who built that's no longer available. All right, so it's a little bit of a grainy photo. I've been this guy. This is not me, but I've been in these closets like this where it's so bad and you've got to work and you got to get things done and you just crawl into the big mess of cables and you start working. It is what it is, but this kind of environment, once it's got to this critical mass for a business, tearing this back out and making it clean is a very, very expensive process rather than just doing it right to begin with. And there's a way to do it right to begin with. It's not hard. It's not more time consuming. It just is just patience and organization structure to get it done. So So here's another server closet. I mean, the things wrong here, as you can see, there's two really heavy-duty UPSs on the ground over here in the corner, laying on their sides. I don't care if they're on their sides, except there's nothing to keep them from falling over. And if those heavy things fall over, they're probably taking some cables with them. Water comes in, it's going to destroy a bunch of stuff. You've got two other UPSs here. It looks like they're on a board sitting a little higher off the ground. And then you've just got a big bunch of cable mess. It's just impossible to troubleshoot this. And I bet you there's some obsolete hardware sitting in here turned off that you don't know where it goes to. Looks like there may be an old phone system in here. Maybe it's an old Avaya or something. Probably isn't even functional, just sitting there taking up space, maybe even taking up power, still turned on. Over here to the far left, that looks like some kind of air duct that maybe runs through the facility. I don't know, this right here might be gas line. It could be some other kind of water line or conduit of some kind running behind all this. But you just got a lot of nope going on here. I do like that they have one rack mounted to the wall these cables, they could have been cut to length. They could have done this nice and clean, but instead they draped them over and then they put equipment behind the cable. So if this piece of equipment here dies, getting it out is going to be very difficult. You may even have to disconnect the cable, have a network outage. But otherwise, if this had been cut to length cables and it was nice and neat, dress right dress, and everything was labeled, you could remove equipment. You could probably even get away with having to have a lot of downtime if you needed to replace something that died. Okay, kind of more of the same. Another big old cable mess in a closet. All this should be dress right dress, should be labeled. Shouldn't be any direct runs. Every cable coming from the organization, the desktops and the printers in the organization should go to a punch down where they're labeled so you know how to trace that back to the desktop from the network closet. And then from there, from the network closet punch down, then they go down to the equipment that they're going to plug into. And you've got 100 different colors here. Are they color coded? Oh, absolutely not. That's just whatever cables these people could find when they were building the system or adding on to it. You know, if the IT guy had a red cable sitting in his bag at the time he needed one, that's what went in. And that shouldn't be that way. You should have either all of your stuff should be color coded or it should be all one color. There's no reason to have a whole bunch of different colors unless they mean something. The only reason a network looks like this is typically because people got lazy and they didn't want to go find the right color cable, or there was one laying around that was a different color. But this color coding in here, I guarantee you none of these cables mean a dang thing. So then you look over here on the ground, that looks like another battery backup maybe sitting on the ground right there. The ground's dirty. You can kind of tell it's kind of filthy in here, a lot of dust everywhere. It's not being maintained. Just a big old messy room. But you know what? They at least got it off the ground and the wall right here, even though they put all their power that runs all this equipment directly on the ground. This is a big no-go for data centers. If you go into a very high-end data center, they will not allow cardboard around the servers because it's flammable. There's all kinds of rules around that. Their insurance isn't going to cover them. You know, we went to a large data center in Texas many years, or not Texas, in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, many years ago. And we had to unbox all of our servers and then take them in on carts without any cardboard because of the fire hazard. They're very strict on that. So you should be too. Your network closet, your server's equipment will put out a lot of heat, especially if you ever have an outage for your AC unit or your cooling system. They'll put out a lot of heat. You know what? You're not going to turn those off just because your cooling's off because you have a business to run. So don't allow paper or anything else in your closet that could get sucked in or catch on fire and burn your building down. So this should not be in here. And then you got obsolete old equipment just laying around. Get rid of that stuff. You're not going to throw it back into production. If you do throw it back into production, you're going to regret it. We've seen that time and again where people will pull old computers out of production, throw them in a closet thinking, well, I may need that someday. Then they bring it out of the closet 2 years later and try to give it to an employee, and they waste hours and hours trying to get an old computer to work, only to find out it's not going to work, and then they have to get a different solution. So don't do that. Get rid of old equipment properly, dispose of it properly. Okay, so this is a company that we did a rebuild on, and this is probably my favorite thing I've ever seen at a client site for how to do things wrong. So these cables were literally ran between a light bulb and an elevator shaft and the plug it was plugged into. Every bit of this, they're just you'd have to be hard pressed to do it worse than this. Some things that are going on here. One is they're using Ethernet cable as ties to tie together Ethernet cable. They're tying the Ethernet cable off on a conduit that has electricity running through it. And if you tie off your cable to a conduit, there's the electrical feedback you'll get, and it'll mess up your network. We call it ghost of the machine. So if you have a bunch of cable tied off on conduit or on high voltage conduit or next to transformers, which in this case, there was a bunch of transformers going in this room with a lot of electromagnetic interference, you're going to create ghost of the machine that you have to track down and figure out. And you're just not going to. You're going to have to recable the whole facility, which is exactly what we had done for this company. But this is stuff where you're just like, okay, the person who ran these cables had to know. They had to know you cannot wrap cables around a light bulb. That's just a no-go. Excessive, you got your fire stop up here. Great, they're using fire stop. Hooray. But there's about a dozen other places in this organization where fire stop was just completely gone and not used at all, including in the server room. So someone knew what they were doing and putting fire stop in, and then everyone else just whoever ran the cables just kind of threw them together. Here's a good example of how not to run wireless. So this is another client we did a network rebuild for. This is a transformer down here in an elevator shaft. As you can see, they've got the switch just sitting on top of a transformer, and that is a Cisco SMB switch. Way underpowered. It's not the right equipment for an organization this size. This is an actual hospital. That's a wireless access point, so Ubiquiti UAP. Just sitting on top of the switch, which is sitting on top of a transformer, which is facing the ceiling, which is surrounded by concrete on all four walls, an elevator shaft that generates electromagnetic energy, and then tons of conduit on the wall. And before we came along, the organization couldn't figure out why their wireless wouldn't stretch very far in the organization. And I get it. I mean, they don't know, and I'm not digging against them. But the organization had put their faith in someone to build their network, and this is what that person thought a good network should look like. As you can see, someone else has come in here and done some sheetrock mud, and it's just splattered all over all the equipment. It's just not. It's just amateur hour, and it's really kind of sad because this hospital had suffered for years with network issues that could have been remedied with just some cleanup, recabling, some money, but to get it done right. And once it's done right, maintaining it is not a big deal if you have the right people doing it. Okay, here we go again. So as you can see, all this red is fire stop. And so someone's ran cables through here. The fire stop's good. Yes, you want to have every hole plugged, especially in hospitals, anywhere there's a fire break. But as you can see, they've just tied off and ran over water and electrical conduit. All this is high voltage. They've got cables that are over lights. One of the things you run into with running cables over lights is they'll have what's called a ballast on older style lights before we got into LEDs. And the ballast puts out a lot of electromagnetic interference. And your network cable is unshielded. So if you run that cable over an old light socket, you're going to have problems with connectivity and drop connection and other issues. And then you don't want to really twist your cables up and have them free hanging. Ethernet cable is twisted inside the jacket for a reason, and it allows the cable to get the signal farther. And since it's unshielded and since it is twisted for a reason, anytime you twist it more or tie it in knots or zip tie it on something, you're creating problems. You're making the cable not operate the way it was designed. This is another thing we found in a hospital as we were doing a discovery. This is Linksys. This is consumer grade. This stuff is garbage is an understatement. Should never have made its way into a hospital. There's no visibility into this, no visibility into the network that's of any real value. You've got cables here that were punched down with the jacket outside of the punch down. That's a no-go. That puts strain on the cables. Again, you're going to have problems with these cables and connectivity almost certainly. This box was mounted, or this rack was mounted to the wall, and they just had phone jacks, old equipment that needed to be yanked out, just sitting here taking up space and creating headaches for the support organization, which was us. Same organization. This is one of their closets. Actually, this isn't even a closet. This was open in an area where people could walk through with no security whatsoever. And that is how they ran all of their telemetry equipment, was ran that way. When we came in and took care of them, this equipment was outside the scope of what we were doing. They brought in the telemetry company, put in a whole new system, and they actually did a pretty good job on the second time they did the telemetry equipment. But this was what they considered to be acceptable early on. Again, Cisco SMB switching, way outdated. My favorite on this one was that is the patch panel. So all your cables normally run, again, from your desk or your work areas, and they run from those areas where the employees' computers are plugged in over to a centralized location, a network closet, demarcation point, whatever you want to call it. And they go into the back of a patch panel. And then the patch panel on the front has short cables that go over to a switch. And that's how you keep everything labeled and documented and traced. Well, what they've done is they put the cables coming in. About half of them went to this patch panel, which they mounted backward. I do not know why they mounted it backward, but we couldn't see any labels. There was no labels on the other side. But it's in here backward. And then some of these cables come and do direct runs to the switch, and none of this is labeled properly. Almost everything in here is now out of date. So this is what things should look like in a clean environment. Things are off the ground, they're mounted up high, nice and clean. You're using cables that are the right length so that you can see all the labels and the ports and you can change things. This is not something we did, but we've done this exact thing in the past. This is what good looks like. Not hard. You want backer board on the wall. It's got to be anchored properly, so because you're carrying a lot of weight. These are battery backups. They're not light. But this is a good way of getting your system mounted properly and configured. I'm going to show, I've got a few things a little outside of the network closet, but I want to talk about your wireless access point. So Ubiquiti is a very popular wireless access point system. They make other stuff, but we like it real well. It's low cost. It's pretty reliable. But normally when you put this stuff up, you need to label it so that people can see the labels on it, your technical staff, and know what it is, where it's located, where it's going to, and so on. And you don't do that in a way. We used to do it where you put things on there like MAC addresses and IP addresses and all kinds of really good information. We don't do that now because of the liability and security concerns. If you're putting that information out there, someone could see it and then try to gain access to your system. So don't do that. But put some information on your access points so people can identify them. Again, that's consumer grade switching, and that was the last slide. So that's form follows function. If you've been convinced that your network closets and all of your equipment should look like garbage, that it's okay, that that's just the way things are, it is not. When an IT guy comes in to help support your organization, and let's say you have someone in-house that's doing support for you now, your new guy coming in is going to have to get all that information out of your in-house guy, and it's going to be very expensive and very difficult for the new guy to take over and help with anything in there. A lot of times it's going to require a rip and replace to get all those things organized and structured. So if your network closets look bad, get them cleaned up. Get your in-house person or your third party to start taking care of that, labeling things and making it organized. Because when that catastrophe happens, that something burns down, something floods, whatever you need to do, and you have to bring in additional help in your organization, it's going to be very difficult for them to find anything, to be able to help without just pinning down your current guy, whoever it is, inside or outside, and trying to get that information out of them. We should be able to walk in, things should be standardized, identify where the servers are, what the network drops are, how the drops are connected from the desktop all the way to the server closet, to the punch down, to the switches, from the switches to the servers, and so on. We should be able to just troubleshoot that and solve problems quickly. So, but if everything's a scrambled mess, it's going to be very difficult to do. That's all I've got. That's a long Tech Tip Tuesday. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hope you'll be able to sleep at night knowing if your closet's a mess or not. If you need any help getting your closet cleaned up, we'd love to help. That's all I've got. Have a great rest of your week.